The phone rang at 6:47 in the morning. Maya Bennett almost didn't answer it. She was 3 time zones away, halfway through a work trip, half asleep with her charger cord tangled around her wrist. But something made her pick up. It was her cousin, Renee. Her voice was flat, careful, the kind of careful people use when they've rehearsed what they're about to say. "Maya, your mom passed." Maya sat up so fast the phone nearly slipped from her hand. "What? When? Renee, when?" There was a pause, too long a pause. "The funeral was yesterday." The words didn't make sense at first. They floated somewhere above her, refusing to land. Yesterday. The funeral was yesterday. Her mother had already been lowered into the ground, and Maya hadn't even known she was sick. She had spoken to her mother 11 days earlier. 11 days. A short phone call, nothing unusual. Her mother had sounded tired, but her mother always sounded tired. She was 68. Tired was normal. "She wasn't even sick," Maya whispered. "She wasn't sick, Renee." It was sudden, Renee said, too quickly, too rehearsed. Maya sat on the edge of a hotel bed in a city she couldn't even name at that moment, and she understood, somewhere underneath the shock, that something was wrong. Not just the death, something before it, something around it. Her mother, Delphine Aucaffer, had raised her alone. No father in the picture, no easy money, nothing handed to either of them. Delphine cleaned office buildings at night for 11 years, so Maya could finish school without debt. She wore the same winter coat for over a decade because she said new coats were for people who had somewhere fancy to be. And now she was gone, and nobody had called Maya until it was already over. She flew home the next morning, 9 hours in the air, staring at the small oval window, replaying every phone call she'd had with her mother over the past year, searching for clues she'd missed. A tremor in her voice. A pause that lasted a second too long. Anything. She found nothing, because there had been nothing to find, not from her mother's side. The family home was full when she arrived, not full of grief, full of people. Aunts, uncles, cousins moving through the house with paper plates, speaking in low voices that stopped whenever she walked into a room. Her uncle Desmond, her mother's older brother, met her at the door. He hugged her stiffly, too stiffly. "We tried to reach you," he said. "Nobody called me until she was already buried." He didn't answer that. He looked past her, toward the kitchen, like there was somewhere else he needed to be. That was the moment Maya understood something quietly and completely. This wasn't a story about grief anymore. Not only. This was a story about a family that had made a decision together, without her, and was now hoping she wouldn't ask too many questions. She was about to ask a great many questions. The days after the funeral were the strangest of Maya's life. She wasn't shown where her mother was buried. Every time she asked, someone changed the subject. Desmond said the cemetery paperwork was still being finalized. Her Aunt Corinne said she'd take her next week, once things calmed down. Next week never came. She asked to see the death certificate. Nobody had a copy handy. She asked which hospital her mother had been taken to. The answers didn't match. Desmond said one hospital, Corinne said another, and when Maya called both, neither had a record of Delphine Aucaffer being admitted at all. She sat with that fact for a long time. No hospital record, no death certificate anyone could produce, no grave anyone was willing to show her. Then came the will. It was read on a Thursday afternoon, in a lawyer's office that smelled like old carpet and coffee that had been sitting too long. Maya sat at the end of the table. Her family sat around it like they already knew what was coming. The house, gone, transferred to Desmond 2 months earlier. The small savings account closed. Emptied, the funds moved to an account under Corinne's name. The only thing left with Maya's name on it was a small wooden box. The lawyer said that Delphine had asked to be given to her daughter and no one else. Desmond scoffed under his breath. "A box of junk," he muttered. "Mama kept everything. Ribbons, old photos, nothing worth anything." Nobody argued with him. Nobody looked at Maya either. She took the box home that night and sat with it on her lap for almost an hour before she opened it. Inside were old photographs, a faded church program, a small gold ring that had belonged to her grandmother, and tucked beneath a folded blue scarf, a business card. Cream-colored, slightly worn at the corners. The name on it read Harriet Solomon, Elder Law and Estate Litigation. On the back, in her mother's careful handwriting, were 4 words: "If something happens, call." Maya sat very still for a long moment, the card between her fingers, her mother's voice suddenly very loud in her memory. If something happens, not if I get sick, not if I pass. If something happens, like her mother had known, long before any of this, that whatever was coming toward her wasn't going to be an accident of nature. Maya's hands were steady when she picked up the phone, steadier than they had been in days. She dialed the number on the card. A woman answered on the second ring, her voice calm, unhurried, like she had been waiting for this call for longer than Maya could have guessed. "Harriet Solomon. My name is Meyer Ackhafer Bennett," Maya said slowly. "I think my mother wanted me to call you before she died." There was a pause on the line, a long one. "Before she died," Harriet repeated softly. "Or before someone told you she did?" Maya's stomach dropped straight through the floor. Harriet Solomon's office was small, tucked above a dry cleaner's on a quiet street 2 towns over. She was maybe 60, silver-haired, with reading glasses pushed up into her hair, and a manner that made Maya feel, for the first time in a week, like someone was finally on her side. "Your mother came to me 4 months ago," Harriet said, sliding a folder across the desk. "She was frightened, Maya, not of dying, of being erased while she was still alive." Meyer opened the folder with hands that weren't entirely steady. Inside were bank statements, property records, a power of attorney document signed 2 months before the funeral that Delphine had never mentioned to Maya once. Desmond's name was on it, granting him control over her mother's accounts in the event of incapacity. "She never told me any of this," Maya whispered. "She didn't want to worry you," Harriet said gently. "She told me the same thing about most things her whole life, I imagine." Over the following 2 weeks, Harriet and Maya pieced together a story that made Maya's chest ache in a way grief alone never had. 6 months before the funeral, Delphine had been quietly moved into a care facility 2 counties away, not because she was unwell, but because Desmond had convinced a doctor, using the power of attorney, that she was no longer capable of managing her own affairs. Signatures were gathered. Accounts were drained under the excuse of medical costs. The house was sold before Delphine even knew it was on the market. And when Delphine began asking too many questions, began threatening to call a lawyer, began, as Harriet put it, becoming inconvenient, the story of a sudden death appeared with remarkable speed. There was no death certificate because there had been no death. Not then. Maya read every page twice. Her hands were shaking again, but not from sorrow this time. "Where is she?" Meyer asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Harriet, where's my mother?" Harriet reached across the desk and took Maya's hand. "That," she said quietly, "is what we're about to find out." It took 9 more days. 9 days of quiet phone calls, of Harriet pulling records the family never imagined anyone would think to look for, of a private investigator named Otis who specialized, he said dryly, in finding people who aren't supposed to be found. On the 10th day, Otis called with an address. A small assisted living facility 3 hours north, under a name Maya didn't recognize at first, until she realized it was her mother's maiden name, the one almost nobody used anymore. Maya didn't wait for anyone. She got in her car that same afternoon and drove. The woman at the front desk of the facility looked up Delphine's name, frowned slightly at the screen, and said, "She doesn't get many visitors." Maya's whole body went cold and hot at once. "She's here," Maya said, not a question, a confirmation spoken out loud so it would finally feel real. She walked down a quiet hallway that smelled like lemon cleaner and old radiators, past rooms with doors half open, until she reached the last one on the left. Her mother was sitting by the window in a soft blue cardigan, thinner than Maya remembered, her hair a little grayer, but alive. Undeniably, impossibly alive. Delphine turned at the sound of the door, and for one long second neither of them moved. Then her mother's face broke open, and she said Maya's name the way she used to say it when Maya was small and had fallen and needed to be picked up, half relief, half disbelief, all love. Maya crossed the room in 3 steps and dropped to her knees beside the chair, and for a long time neither of them said anything at all. There was only the sound of Maya crying into her mother's shoulder, and her mother's thin hand stroking the back of her head, over and over, the way she used to. "I thought you were gone," Maya finally managed. "They told me they buried an empty casket, Mama. They told everyone you were dead." Her mother's jaw tightened, and for just a moment Maya saw something underneath the frailty, something sharp, something that had survived a great deal and was not finished yet. "I know," Delphine said quietly. "I've had a great deal of time to think about what I want to do about that." What happened next did not happen quickly. Grief fraud, elder abuse, forged medical incapacity claims, these things move slowly through courts. Harriet warned them both, even when the truth is plain as daylight. But it did happen. Desmond's power of attorney was revoked within the month. The house, sold without Delphine's real consent, became the center of a fraud case that made the local paper, quietly at first, then not quietly at all, once a reporter learned that an entire family had staged a funeral to seize an elderly woman's estate. Kareen's name on the drained accounts became a separate matter entirely, one with its own set of consequences. Desmond did not go to prison, in the end. The court called it a civil matter, mostly, tangled up in medical liability and forged consent forms. But he lost everything he had taken, and more besides legal fees, his reputation in the small town where everyone eventually learned what he'd done, and the only mother he had left, who never spoke his name again without a long, careful pause beforehand. Delphine moved in with Maya. It took time for her to trust doors that locked from the inside again, time for her to stop flinching when paperwork was placed in front of her. But she healed, the way people do when they are finally, truly safe. They visited the empty grave together once, the one with her name on the headstone, the one meant to close the book on a woman who was never given the chance to write her own ending. Delphine stood in front of it for a long moment, her daughter's hand in hers, and said nothing at all. She didn't need to. They didn't remove the headstone. Delphine asked that it stay exactly where it was. "Let it remind people," she said, "what family will do when they think no one is watching and no one is listening and no one is ever going to ask a single question." Maya thinks about that grave often now, the one with her mother's name carved into stone above an empty box of earth. And she wonders, sometimes late at night, how many other names are carved into stones like that one. How many other families have quietly decided that someone they loved had simply become inconvenient? So I'll leave you with the question my mother's story left me. If the people closest to you decided tomorrow that you had become too much trouble to keep around, would anyone left standing think to ask why the grave felt so strangely light?